Before we can start to do any hands-on designing or dive into sketches, it's really important to think about what the idea is behind our typeface and to think about the context of our designs. Let's consider the type designs that have come before us and why they were designed the way they were. Historically, the technology of the time has affected how typefaces look. For example, when you think about how the numbers look in a digital clock, you'll probably think about something that looks like this microwave screen that you can see on the lower right corner. This is called a 7-segment display. It has the 7 bars that can light up to display all the numbers. And for a while, this was the most cost-efficient way to represent time. So this is why the numbers in our heads when we think about digital clocks look this way. Same thing with low pixel letters. This might be considered an aesthetic at this point, but back in the day when they first came about, this is because the resolutions of the screens that these letters were shown in were so low that they had to be designed for that kind of screen. And you'll remember that some lectures ago we talked about the modularity of typefaces. And when these designers were designing typefaces, they were considering what kinds of modularity that they had to be using in order for their typeface to be shown. And you'll see that this modularity and the design choices were greatly affected by what was available. And if you think about the vellum manuscripts of the medieval times, or even a little bit after that, the most common way to produce books was to have a person write them. So the calligrapher would write each page, page after page, day after day, and it was very labor intensive to produce. It was very expensive. The materials were made out of animal skin, so it really was not cheap and took a long time. And if we think about the invention of printing when it comes around in Europe, Gutenberg invents the movable press in the mid 15th century. The letter forms start to gain a lot more uniform aesthetics because this was required by the technology. They were being made out of metal. There were molds that were created, and these molds were reused to create more letters of the same shape and size. So you can imagine that once a mold for an O was made, there would be more O's of that same shape cast in metal. And so therefore the O's would look exactly the same, as opposed to the letters that were being written by the scribes in the medieval times, where every time you write an O, it would look slightly different. Now, we'll skip a few centuries and then go look at this modular wood type. This was a sample from Italy. You can see that the system was created so that printers could print letters of different proportions and sizes without having to buy all these different cases of type. You can see that this R in the middle of the page here, this like dark R, that would have been able to be created with all these different parts that are listed on the left side here. So you can imagine with this combination, you could have almost an infinite number of R's that could be created, like tall, narrow, wide, what have you. And then as time progresses, we see modularity being used for stylistic effects. So here we can see Futura being very, very inspired by the Bauhaus movement. The simplified rational forms were popular for Bauhaus aesthetics. So we can imagine that having these very geometric forms was not necessary for the technology back then, but it's more of a cultural movement that this typeface was reflecting, let's say. And then here we see Julian. It's a 2010 typeface. It's relatively new compared to all the examples that we've been seeing. So as technology progresses, we see designs breaking away from the previous restrictions. So here we can see in this digital typeface, there's a lot of alternates. So here we can see the letter A having so many digital alternates because it's possible for the typeface to have all these alternates, and it's not any more expensive to ship the digital typeface from one place to another. So if you can imagine, if this was the day of Gutenberg, someone would have had to make molds for all these different A's, and so it would have cost physical material. It would have cost a lot of labor for people to create those molds. But digitally, as long as the designer is willing to put in the time and effort, the cost of manufacturing is a lot less. Now, let's think about our modern day and what the technology is that surrounds us in our day to day life. For example, there's the consideration that for apps and websites, we should be creating typefaces that are smaller in their font file size because they should load fast. Maybe there's also the consideration for all this very, very new technology, such as augmented reality, virtual reality. If you can imagine someone like putting on these like futuristic goggles and seeing a virtual world in there, what should the type in there look like? Because that's a different environment from our physical space. One interesting thing I like to note is that digital typefaces are surprisingly resilient to time. Many typefaces that we use today were made in the 80s or 90s. And if you think about what computers used to look like in the 80s or 90s, it's pretty astonishing. All these devices that we're using have changed so much. The resolution of the screens have changed so much. But yet, we are still using the digital typefaces that were designed so long ago. I mean, so long ago in digital terms, that is. And here we can see an example of Georgia, a serif typeface that was designed in 1993 by Matthew Carter. And the chances are you probably have Georgia as a system font on your machine. And you can use Georgia in all these different places, but it was made so long ago. That's very interesting to think about. Also, let's think about the fact that there are many, many digital typefaces available. If you just look up digital typefaces, like on the internet, you can see so many different versions, so many different designs. Like it would probably take you forever to look through all of them. Now, why would you want to create a new typeface? It takes a long time and it's not a small task. So, why would you want to make a new typeface for yourself or for other people out there in the world? So let's think about what designing a typeface means for us. Designing a typeface today means something very different from someone from 100 years ago thinking about this. We have digital technology that is very different from a type designer that was trying to make type 100 years ago, of course. Um, what are we trying to say also? What are we trying to reflect in our typefaces? Are we trying to make a tool for someone, such as making a typeface for ebook? Or are we trying to make it for some kind of cultural movement that's going on? Is it for a cause that we specifically believe in? Or maybe it's a form of self expression. And all of these bear considering because, again, making a typeface will take you many hours. And so you want to have a good reason for spending so much of your time and to keep yourself motivated for creating progress on your typeface. And then later on, if you eventually want to release your typeface to the public or even sell it, you might want to ask, like, why would somebody want to use my typeface? Why would somebody want to spend money? And this is a question that is something that we should think about because we're going to invest all this time and effort, and we probably want to see it out there in the world. And again, if we think these things through, it saves us so much time later on.